Welcome to the 16th class on the structure and details of the second Beis Hamikdash. So this class is going to be different than the previous classes. In this class, we're going to explore a little bit of the history that's connected to the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. So here we have a timeline starting from year 0, and we're going to move along to when we have the Mishkan, which was here we had the Mishkan for 479 years. Then Beis Rishon was for 410 years. Then there was the Galus for 70 years, and the Beis Sheni was for 420 years. So let's start with the Mishkan. So in the Mishkan, you could say there was generally 5 stages. At the beginning, the Mishkan was in the Midbar for 39 years. Then, when Yeshua brought the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael, it took 7 years to conquer the land from the nations that were living there, and 7 years to divide the land among the Shvatim. So during those 14 years, the Mishkan was in a place called Gilgal. After that, the Mishkan was in a place called Shiloh for 369 years. And in Shiloh, it wasn't just that it was there for a long time, but also the structure was different, because in the Midbar and in Gilgal, it was a completely temporary structure. Both the covering above the Kodesh and Kodesh Gadashim was made out of material, and also the walls, both of the outer courtyard and of the Kodesh and Kodesh Gadashim, could be taken apart and put back together. However, in Shiloh, although the roof was made out of material, but the actual structure was more permanent. It was a permanent structure that was made out of stone. And this is actually the Mishkan that Binyamin cried about when he hugged Yosef, because the Mishkan Shiloh was in the portion of Ephraim, which Ephraim got a portion as the son of Yosef. Then there were 2 more places where the Mishkan was. The Rambam includes them together. He says that it was a Neiv and Given for 57 years. 13 years in Neiv and 44 years in Given. And over here, just like in Shiloh, it was a permanent structure in terms of the walls being made out of stone. Now, just very briefly, during this time, you could see who was taking care of and ruling over the Yidden. So during the Midbar, it was Moshe Rabbeinu. Then we have Yeshua for 28 years, then the Zkenim. And then afterwards, and this is the majority of the time by the Mishkan, there were the Shoftim. We're just going to show very briefly, so you can see how the Shoftim were, during this time, leading and ruling over the Yidden. And then towards the end, we have the Malachim of Shaul, David, and even a little bit from Shlomo, because Shlomo Melech built the Beis Rishon 4 years into his kingdom. So even though it said over there 40, that's his entire time that he ruled, but it was 4 years during the Mishkan. Now for Beis Rishon, so this is the time that there were kings and Nevi'im. So it was no longer Shoftim, there were Malachim, and there were Nevi'im. Now, for the Malachim, there were 3 Malachim that ruled over all of the Yidden. They were Shaul, David, and then Shlomo. And then afterwards, the Melucha was split in 2. The Malchei David, or Malchei Yehuda, and Malchei Yisrael. So for Malchei Yehuda was for 374 years, all the way to the destruction of Beis Rishon. And there were 20 kings, and Malchei Yisrael was for 241 years until the year 3205, 133 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. They had 19 kings, and after 241 years, that's when Sancheriv completely expelled the 10 Shvatim, and Sancheriv, like it says, he moved around all the peoples, and that's where we lost the 10 Shvatim. Now we're going to move along briefly to the Galus. Okay, we can see here on the bottom just the Malachim, the time that they ruled over. First the Malchei Yehuda, and then afterwards we'll see the Malchei Yisrael, but we'll just bring that up really quickly. So you see over here there are 20 kings. 2 of them ruled for less than a year, so they're mentioned on the side. And by the Malchei Yisrael, actually 3 of them ruled for less than a year, so they'll also be mentioned on the side at the end. Okay, so now moving along to the Galus. So very, very briefly, Sancheriv, the king of Ashur, he was ruling, like we said then, at the time of the Malchei Yisrael at the end over there. And afterwards, Nebuchadnezzar conquered, and he became the powerful force in the world, the Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. And he ruled for 45 years from during the time of Beis Rishon into the Galus. Then Evil Merodach ruled for 23 years. Then Belshazzar ruled for 3 years. And Belshazzar made a calculation that the Beis Hamikdash has to be built, and he thought it was 70 years after Nebuchadnezzar came into power. That's how he miscalculated. He thought 45, 23, and 2 years into his rule, that's 70 years, and he used the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. He died afterwards, and then actually the power started shifting towards Paras. Paras became the dominant force. So it went from Ashur to Bavel, and now it moved along to Paras. Achashverosh also made a wrong calculation. He thought you're supposed to start 8 years later, when I think it was King Yehoiachin was put into Galus, but his mistake was they actually have to start 19 years after Nebuchadnezzar came to power, when the Beis Hamikdash was actually destroyed by Bavel. Then moving along to Beis Sheni. So Beis Sheni was built with the permission of the powerful country at the time, which was Paras, like we just saw. They went for, these numbers are very general, and we're just going to break it up for the sake of having some clarity. Afterwards, Yavin came into power for 180 years. At the end of this 180 years, right here was when the story of Hanukkah occurred. Then the Chashmonaim were in power for 103 years, followed by Horus, who was already under the control of the Romans for the final 103 years before Rome destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash. And with that, we'll end the 16th class.